Good morning. I'm AJ Bloomstone. I'm the Acquisitions Librarian at the LSU Law School Library in Baton Rouge, and I am the outgoing chair of the TS-SIS Education Committee. I welcome you to our 2011 Hot Topic program today, the RDA decision and what it will mean for me in my library. Before we begin, however, a few housekeeping details. We'd like to hold comments until the end of our speakers' short presentations, and then we'll open the floor for discussion and your contributions. Please use the floor mic so that everybody can hear your comments and questions. In the event of an emergency, our exit door is the same one as our entrance door, so it shouldn't be too hard to find. And as we're about to begin the program, please turn off your cell phones or change your ring features to vibrate. We are trying to have an amateur video representation of this program so that it will be recorded and people will be able to go back to it later. Please don't forget to fill out the evaluation forms after the program. These evaluations are absolutely instrumental in planning educational programs for the membership in the coming year, as well as you are submitting proposals for programs next summer. Should you have an idea for a proposal, share it with the TS Education Committee if you'd like our sponsorship by August 15th, and the deadline for submitting to AMPIC is September 15th. So we only have a short window. If you have any questions at all, contact any member of the Education Committee, and there will be emails coming out with the email address for you to share it with us. Our discussion today will be led and moderated by Jean Pajaric and Pat Sayre-McCoy, and I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Jean is the head of information management at Cornell Law Library. She has a bachelor's degree in language and linguistics from the State University of New York at Binghamton and holds the MLS from the State University of New York at Albany. She's been an active member of AALL and the Tech Services Special Interest Section since 1985. Pat Sayre-McCoy is the head of cataloging and serials at the D'Angelo Law Library, University of Chicago. She's been a law librarian since 1987 and a cataloger/technical services librarian, among other things, since 1982. Her MLS is from the University of Michigan, and she was one of the University of Chicago RDA testers this past year and has continued to catalog in RDA since the end of the test period. I'll turn it over to Pat and Jean. Thank you.
Thank you, AJ. Good morning, everyone. When Pat and I were talking about how to get our discussion rolling, we thought one way to do it would be to ask the audience how many people are technical services librarians and how many people are not. And looking out in the audience, we decided we know almost all of you are technical services librarians, but if there's anyone who's not a technical services librarian and is not afraid to say so, would you raise your hand? Yeah. Okay, so there's a few. Good to know. Just for your information, Pat has a program coming up immediately after this one. Do we know what room that's in? Do we know what room that's in? 20 something?
204, I believe it is. Yes, 204A.
Great. And she's going to be talking about the test experience that they had at Chicago. My qualifications for being in this discussion is that I'm the co-chair of the RDA training committee at my university, and we have been working on training our staff since about February of this year. We've held several training sessions, and when the announcement came out in June that RDA wasn't going to be implemented any sooner than January 2013, we kind of took a breath and we thought, we're off the hook for at least a little while. We thought we'd have a hiatus for a while. I was also afraid that the things that we had taught the people already would be forgotten by January 2013. But the powers that be in the library system said, keep on training, keep going. So that's what we're doing. We're going to keep training people, and they have decided that we're probably going to implement RDA at our library sooner than January 2013. Maybe as early as January 2012. There are still a lot of unresolved issues with RDA. There's a lot of things about NACO. We're NACO contributors at Cornell, and Pat told me that Chicago is too. There's a lot about creating NACO records that we don't know how that's going to go. And there's some issues about serials cataloging that we don't know how that's going to be resolved either. So there's still some waiting to do. But there's some things that we can start thinking about now, and in fact should start thinking about now, because we have to start planning. Before I really jump into it, I want to draw your attention to this document from the Library of Congress. It was issued June 21st, 2011, and it says RDA transition, frequently asked questions. And it starts with, the first question is, what is this RDA I keep hearing about? So it assumes no prior knowledge of RDA, and it goes through these categories: the RDA implementation decision, the future of RDA, training and documentation, impact on workflow, systems, and catalogs, and then there's a section called For the Future. So this document it's 10 pages long, and I found it pretty useful and interesting, and can print it off the web. Okay, so having said all that, the first thing that confronted my institution having to do with RDA was, what is our local system vendor going to do about RDA? And that was because back when the test started, that was what, October? Yes, October of 2010. We started to see RDA records in OCLC, and our copy catalogers started to download them, and we looked at them and said, wow, what do we do about that? It's got these funny 33X fields. What will our system do with those? How will they display to the public? Will the public think they're weird? Answer yes. Do we want to mask them from the public? So we made sure at Cornell we use Ex Libris Voyager. So we made sure that our tag tables would accept these new fields. They wouldn't reject them. There's some issues about indexing that you have to think about, because in RDA you can put extra tags onto, say, for example, name headings, relationship designators, like Harriet James author, subfield E author. And how is that going to look in your display where all the old James Harriets just say James Harriet, and then the new ones in RDA say James Harriet author? Or they don't have to. I mean, they could not, but that's a decision point for you. If existing authorized access points are converted nationally to RDA form, what will you do about them in your own catalog? If you use an authority control service, they'll be bringing in these new records, and you'll have old ones in your catalog. I'm really glad that we don't have very much Bible stuff in our library, because all those Bible headings are changing to take the OT and the NT out of those headings. So there's a lot to think about regarding authority control and RDA. Regarding copy cataloging, I don't know if there's any libraries that are actually thinking of not going with RDA, but if there are, you have to think about what's going to happen when your copy catalogers start getting in these RDA records that look very strange. Are you going to convert them to AACR2? You're going to leave them the way they are? What will you do with them? There's also a question about fullness. There's a lot of options in RDA to, well, you have your core elements, and then you have alternatives, and then you have options to omit things, options to add things. There's a lot of catalogers' judgment involved in making RDA records. So it's, I think, entirely conceivable that two catalogers could catalog the same exact thing and come up with two very different records. And I believe that is borne out by the test.
Yes.
Because I've looked at a lot of the records that were created by different libraries during the test, and they're very, very different looking, all different levels of fullness. In RDA, some of you probably know this, there's no more rule of three. So you can describe the statement of responsibility, you can transcribe, the statement of responsibility of every single person that's on there, or just the first person. You can make access points for all of them if you want to, or not. So you'll find records covering a whole range of complexity, completeness, and length. So when you can have certain policies in place for your original cataloging. You could say something like, well, if there's more than 3 authors, we're just going to say the first one and how many others in square brackets. We're going to do that for our original catalog. But you might get in copy that says, you know, this person, this 16 people. And are you going to leave those like that? You could. It's easier than making it smaller, but it will create, the point is it's going to create inconsistency in your catalog and the way the records appear in your catalog. Okay, so then there's the whole 33X field issue. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, these are fields that are replacing the general material designator in the which currently appears in the 245 field. That's the title field. And it says things like sound recording or electronic resource. So people can see in your OPAC display right away when they're looking at the title what kind of medium it is. That is going away. It's being replaced by 336, 337, and 33X fields, which are very granular and they're useful in a sense, but they can make a confusing display. One of the commonly used terms is unmediated for print materials, and that doesn't mean anything to lots and lots of people. So do you want that displaying in your catalog? What did you do at Chicago, Pat?
They display for now.
They display for now. So I've seen a lot of talk about having systems look at this combination of three fields and produce an icon instead of listing content, media, carrier, and I haven't actually seen that in action. I don't know if that would work or not. But it does, I think, create some display problems or indexing problems in your OPAC where some of the things will say video recording and other things will not, but they'll both be video recordings. So you're wondering, well, you know, I can't control very much what my ILS vendor does. Perhaps you're thinking that. I know I'm thinking that. I would like to draw people's attention to the RDA Toolkit blog. So if you go to rdatoolkit.org and find the blog there, they've been conducting a series of interviews with ILS vendors. They just recently did Ex Libris, which is my ILS vendor. So they asked each vendor a set of questions about what they were going to do about the implementation of RDA. I think the first one they did might have been Millennium. So that if you go there, you'll see the ones that they've done so far. And I don't know, some of them are more into it than others, obviously. Okay. So I think the next thing that we want to address is what on the talking point?
RDA and the shared catalog.
Okay, so Pat's going to talk about RDA and the shared catalog.
Well, depending on how you define a shared catalog, we're probably all in a shared catalog situation if we get our records from OCLC or Sky River, and that situation's not going away. There are a number of libraries that were either official test partners in the RDA test in October through December of 2010, or a couple of them were really enthusiastic and jumped the gun and started cataloging RDA as soon as RDA was released publicly back in June of 2010. So they're already out there. You're going to see them and you're going to get them. And we all have to decide what to do with them. Obviously, there's the display issue. The University of Chicago is on Horizon, and one of the things that we developed with Horizon was a lot of local autonomy on display and indexing and things like that. So we probably have more control over what we want to display and how we want to take these 3XX or 33X fields and morph them into the same type of information as the GMD, maybe even recreate the GMD. That's still a topic that's under discussion with our systems people. But we have a little more flexibility, and we have them in our catalog now, and so far we haven't heard horrendous screams about it. And I think even if we weren't an RDA library, we would have to accept copy because we don't have time to recatalog RDA back to AACR2, which would be pretty almost absolutely unprecedented because we did not recatalog every title from AACR 1 to AACR 2. When AACR 1 was implemented, we didn't go back and recatalog everything that we had based on the previous cataloging rules or local policies or things like that. So I think for an individual library to go back and redo these records isn't possible, especially with our smaller staffs and tighter budgets. Some vendors are, cataloging record vendors are beginning to develop macros that they can use for individual libraries who purchase their services to upgrade to RDA or upgrade to AACR2. Those of you who are active on AutoCAD know Mac Elrod, and he is, I'm embarrassingly forgetting the name of his cataloging service, but he's been one of the Special Libraries Cataloging, Gene says, and he has talked about the macros that they're developing so that no matter what kind of copy comes in, he can output it to the library's preference. As far as if you're going to accept it, what do you do with it? What do your copy catalogers do with it? And this is an area that's going to require more ability and more training and more expertise from your copy catalogers because AACR2 came into effect in 1982, so many of the copy catalogers and many of the catalogers have never seen anything else. And now they're going to have to remember two different sets of rules, two different sets of standards for what constitutes a good record, what constitutes a record that we have to complete in some way. And there's a little bit of confusion about that because we're all probably guilty of putting in a less than complete record at some time, or forgetting the little subfield E RDA in the 040 and making people guess what kind of record this is. The 33X fields are probably the dead giveaway that this is an RDA record, but not necessarily. And only the 336 and the 338 are core elements. The 337 is not, and that is the media type. So that's where you get that ugly little unmediated that nobody knows what that is. University of Chicago currently is displaying those in our catalog, but like I said, we're working on ways of mapping them. I am not all that familiar with what our main library is doing, but we do have a program called Mark for AC, where Library of Congress records went straight through processing flow in acquisitions and never came to cataloging at all. And now, of course, we can't guarantee to do that because it's RDA. They won't, the acquisitions will not know what's a good record and what's not. I don't know what they're ultimately going to do. Currently, if a Mark for AC RDA record comes in, it goes directly to cataloging to review it. And I don't know if that's going to continue or not. I suspect it will not continue once we start getting a lot of records. So let's see. Yes, and then the optional elements. As Gene said, RDA has a minimal standard of core elements and then a whole bunch of options. And cataloger's judgment, which leads all of us more senior catalogers to say, but how are we going to teach this to a brand new cataloger who has no experience to base judgment on? So obviously local policies will have to be established, and sometimes that can be challenging to get everyone on the same page as to what's important and what's not. For instance, one of the things the University of Chicago came up with was the transcription of statement of responsibility. There are two ways of doing it, as Gene said. You can either say, Harriet Smith and John Doe and Jane Brown, and list all 25 people listed as authors on the title page, or you can say Harriet Smith, bracket, and 25 others, close bracket. We decided we would transcribe the entire statement of responsibility because that will allow keyword searching for these authors, but then it would be cataloger's judgment as to how many added entries to make and how many authority records might or might not need to be established.
Well, Pat, as we say in RDA speak, authorized access.
Yes, I've been corrected. Authorized access points. Yes, it's a whole new vocabulary, which takes a little getting used to. Come to my presentation at the next meeting and see some of the implications of that new vocabulary. And of course, the RDA authority record is different from the AACR2 authority record. Currently, you'll be all happy to know that RDA AACR2 hybrids do exist when it comes to authorized access points, because if an authority record for a name or a corporation already exists in the authority file, we will use it. So that is the only case where you're going to get this blend of the two rules. And that may continue, it may not, we don't know yet. For those of you who are on AutoCAD and heard the whole brouhaha about Wagner suddenly acquiring a lot more middle names than he ever actually used.
Elvis Presley.
Oh, and Elvis Presley, yes. Although I think he's better known than Wagner. I think that was a confusion between what you were supposed to record as information and what you were supposed to put in the authorized access point, because that's vague and confusing in RDA.
And I think, Pat, that was something that came out in the test committee's report.
Yes.
That people couldn't tell the difference between instructions referring to how to construct those authorized access points and what to record in authority records, and it isn't very clear.
Yes. After the test was done, and after every test record, the cataloger filled out a survey, and there was space for comments for both the bibliographic record and the authority record, and oh boy, did they get comments. And some of the changes in RDA are based on those comments. For instance, we screamed very loudly for an index. I think everybody with every single record said, we need an index to this thing. And so there's now an index to RDA. It's not hot linked. You still have to, scroll through page after page. If you're looking for something that begins with W, you got a long road ahead of you. But at least it's there. So it is responsive in that way. The powers that be did listen to the catalogers, which, we're quite gratified, because too many times we're make proposals and send in rule changes and rule interpretations and requests to do something different, and have just kind of been told, no, we don't believe what you're saying is important or a good change, so no, do it our way. Which brings up one more question, and then I'm going to turn this back to Jean for a while, and that is the question about what's going to happen to AACR2. And the answer is that is a continuing resource that has finally ceased. It exists with all of its current rule interpretations up through, I think, 2009. And that's it. It will not be developed further. There will be no more rule interpretations. There will be no more development. And there were a number of points that led to the development of RDA in the first place about adapting to cataloging new media that will not be addressed in AACR2. So if you're going to continue to do AACR2 cataloging, you're going to continue to do it with what you have right now, because it's not going any further. Okay, Jean.
So Pat just answered a question that we got from Susan Carpook at Yale. She was wondering, will AACR2 be undergoing any revision in the meantime? So the answer to that, definitively no. I also got a question from Ellen McGrath, and she says she's interested in hearing tips we might have in terms of the approach to training. So, as I mentioned, I'm on the training committee at Cornell University Libraries, and what we decided for our training, and Pat, you can tell me if this is anything similar to what you did at Chicago, but we thought that people needed to have sort of a theoretical foundation in Ferber in order to understand RDA. And for people who don't know what Ferber is, that's functional requirements for bibliographic records. It forms part of the theoretical framework upon which RDA is based. And because so much of the vocabulary in RDA is based on terms that are used in Ferber, we thought that we had to give people a pretty firm grounding in Ferber principles. So our first training session was all about Ferber. The second one that we did was an introduction to the structure of RDA and how, well, I made a big point in that session to draw the connection very, very explicitly between the Ferber model and its terminology and concepts and RDA. If you have studied RDA, it's very, very clear this connection between the entities and the relationships. And so I made that really explicit in my training. Incidentally, the training sessions that we did at Cornell, the PowerPoints for them, they're on our public wiki. So if you were to Google something like CUL RDA wiki, you would probably find that. The next session that we did was a guided tour of the RDA toolkit. And that was a session that we did in a computer lab with a gigantic screen, and the trainer was typing into the computer when it appeared on the screen, and then we had exercises for people to do on their own computer in that room. And I think that went really well. The RDA toolkit, people have devised some training little things. So if you go to the RDA toolkit page, rdatoolkit.org, they have some videos and things like that that you can study, you can adapt for your own use, or use as a starting point. Also, because we've been doing some of this training in the summer, there was a lot of people on vacation. So we made sure that we saved our presentations so people who weren't there to see them could review them. Right at this very moment, as we're talking, the RDA training committee back at Cornell is doing another session without me. And what they are doing is they're taking a webinar that was given about 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, by Adam Schiff, and it was sponsored by OCLC. I don't know if any of you out there in the audience saw it, but this is a very, very, very nuts and bolts kind of a presentation. Is in 2 parts, a 2-part webinar, and each section was, I think, an hour and a half long. Is that right? An hour and a half long. The first part was about description, and the second part was about access, and what he did was to show side-by-side examples, how we did it in AACR2 and how the same thing would be done in RDA. We had to pay money for that webinar, by the way. I think it was $35 for each of those sessions. So they made recordings of it, and I don't know if OCLC would make you pay for the recordings or what. I don't know how that works, but the guy to contact is Rick Newell at OCLC if you want to get your hands on the recording of those webinars. Rick Newell, I think it's N-E-W-E-L-L. So we found those to be very, very useful. As I said, the side-by-side examples, he covered point-by-point things like the rule of 3, no more, the use of square brackets, the non-use of abbreviations, the non-use of Latin, mostly a no-no, except Richard Unwin said yesterday, except etc. Very, very constrained use of abbreviations in RDA. It's really limited. So it's a very, very useful for people who, what we were thinking is that the original catalogers would be the people interested in that theoretical framework of Ferber and stuff like that. But the people who are like in acquisitions and they're inputting records and stuff like that, they don't care about that stuff. And so they might be more interested in this sort of nuts and bolts approach that Adam Schiff is taking in his webinar. So I highly recommend those. Yeah?
The Adam Schiff webinar, he actually slides and notes up on his faculty website.
That's right, thank you for
Yes.
mentioning that,
So,
yeah.
all of the notes, everything, and he gives permission to adapt it for your own use, or you can use it completely and totally as it is.
So I'm going to repeat what you just said. Thank you so much for saying that. Adam Schiff does have the slides from this webinar available on his website. So you just need to Google him and you can find it there. He's done many versions of the same presentation, and this is the most recent version, so it's the most up-to-date, Carol.
Do you think it would be okay to add a link from the TS?
Oh yeah, he's totally okay with people doing that. So that's a good
You know,
idea.
there's lots of people who are not here that would benefit.
Good point. Yeah. Did you hear that, Marty? Yeah, and he has his very, very detailed notes along with his slides, so you don't even need to hear what he said. You can just read what he said. Yes, was there the? It's S-C-H-I-F-F. He's at the University of Washington. He's a very skillful presenter. So anyway, as I was saying, my committee back home is, they're actually presenting his webinar to our catalogers right now. And what we did was we viewed this webinar together as a committee. There's 5 of us. And we tried, as we were going through it, to identify places where we would need to elaborate more on what he said, give more examples or whatever it was, just things that we wanted to draw our catalogers' particular attention to. That's why we decided to show our catalogers the recorded version, not the live version. We wanted to be able to stop it, ask people if they had questions, add things to it, whatever. So they're showing the recorded version of the webinars to the staff right now. Let's see, anything else? The implementation of RDA is likely to necessitate extensive revision of your local cataloging documentation. And that could take a long time because even just keeping up with your current documentation can be time consuming, at least it is in our library system. We have this very elaborate system of individual procedures assigned to different people in the library system, and it's their job to keep it up to date on a certain timetable. Like every year they're on schedule, supposed to look at the procedure and update it if necessary. So that is a lot of work right there, but other people may not have such an elaborate system in place. Another webinar that I would like to recommend to you, this one is by Christopher Cronin at the University of Chicago, and it's called RDA for Administrators. That's a really good one that touches on the decisions that administrators need to think about in preparation for RDA. And I really don't think you can start too soon. I mean, January 2013 sounds kind of far away, but when you think of all the stuff that needs to be done, it isn't that far away. And also, the Library of Congress has announced that they are going to be doing some cataloging in RDA, I think beginning in the fall, maybe, something like that. They're going to devote like 5% of their cataloging to RDA cataloging. So you'll see LC records even in this interim period appearing. One more thing that was really great about the Adam Schiff presentation that we got because we paid for it. We didn't need this, but some of you might. I think you got 30 free days of access to the RDA toolkit if you paid for that OCLC webinar with Adam Schiff. So they sent a follow-up email the next day saying, hey, here's your 30 free days. At Cornell, we've had access to the toolkit ever since it became available. So we've been playing with it for about a year now. And I have found that very useful. If there are people who are curious and early adapters and things, like one of the people on the training committee, maybe a little bit of a technophobe, but she decided she was going to become the person on the committee who was the specialist, the expert in the toolkit. I don't know what made her decide that, except maybe that she likes a challenge, and she did become the expert in it, and she's the one who led that session with the hands-on. She was so enthusiastic about it by the time she taught the session. She really sold it, I think. She said, oh, I just love this. I love this feature. Look how it works, and she did a really good job of that training. So for those of you who don't already have access to the toolkit, one way to do it might be to investigate that OCLC webinar. And there was something else I was going to say about that. Oh, yeah, there's also, of course, the print version. of RDA. And some people have found that useful, but I haven't used it very much myself. Of course, it's not hyperlinked. I mean, one of the whole idea is about having the RDA toolkit be a web-based resource is because it allows for the use of the hyperlinks. The hyperlinks are really important when LC has issued a policy statement, and you see the little green letters that say LCPS, and you click on it, and it takes you to that policy statement. Those are the things that are replacing the rule interpretations. And at Cornell, we basically obey what LC does, and so we're very interested in the policy statements. I think that's it for this part. Did you have anything you want to say?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Jean, will you repeat the thing about the RDA for administrators?
Yes, yes. That is
Jean, come
Christopher
up
Cronin.
Will you use the mic?
here. Jean, come up here.
Christopher Cronin, C-R-O-N-I-N. It's called RDA for administrators. And it's actually on the PCC website. It looks like where I got it. It's from 2010.
Thank you.
Also on the issue of training, the Library of Congress has a web page set up for RDA training. If you go to loc.gov/CAT-DIR, it will be a separate page with a link that says RDA training, and they have all of their training information, all of their documentation and everything, and of course being LC, it is free. One thing...
Excuse me, they also have all their Train the Trainer webinars.
Yes, they have their webinars. They were very much into the Train the Trainer to kind of, spread the knowledge without LC doing all of it. Those are the ones that we watched at the University of Chicago. We all got together and watched all of their training webinars and found it very useful. Then we could discuss it. We watched them live, so we didn't have the stop action. Does everybody understand? This is everyone clear what we're going to do type of questions. But now they're recorded and available, and I do recommend them. And before we turn this over to general questions from the audience, I just wanted to try and convey the excitement that I felt and some other catalogers felt at being able to be a part of this test, being able to really be hands-on in working with these new rules, with this new online toolkit. It was, after you've been cataloging since 1982, you kind of figured that there's a lot of stuff you can do in your sleep. And, you may be very productive, but you can also, let's face it, be a little bored. This was a whole new way of looking at that. It was a challenge to learn new rules, interpret new rules, compare them and see what was good, what was different, what we really wanted to pursue. And of course, we're much more freer to develop local policies than we were in the past, which is either good or bad depending on what the other library that you get your cataloging copy from decides. But I was very excited to be a part of this test and very excited to be one of the people who got an early look at it and just got refreshed with my cataloging enthusiasm. Sometimes it gets buried in all the stuff that piles up on your desk that you have to take care of right now, and you don't get a chance to see a broad picture. And so I really have been looking at a broad picture for the last year, and it's been really exciting. So I know there are a lot of people who are kind of afraid of RDA, and you can learn it, you can do it. You all learned AACR2. It's not that complicated. The fact that it's only online, I wouldn't use the print. It's frozen in time. We don't know how it's going to be updated. The hot links aren't there. It's really not recommended. But the challenge of using the online toolkit completely online was a challenge for a lot of us. The two of them together looked overwhelming, but it's not. And it's fun. And So go out and jump in.
I just want to say
Sure.
We haven't got our dance right yet.
before we start opening this up for questions, I just wanted to make sure that people knew that there is an email address that you can send your RDA questions to at the Library of Congress, and that is LC Help. This is all squished together. LC Help for RDA, and the 4 is a numeral 4. So LC Help, H-E-L-P, numeral 4, RDA, at loc.gov. When we started our training committee and I was examining lots and lots of RDA records from the test, I came across some that I was really baffled by. There was one that had 2 authors, and it was entered under the title, and I believed it should have been entered under the first name author. So I sent a question to this list, and Judy Kuhagen herself answered my question. It took a little while, but she did send me a very detailed response. So, and it says that LC hopes to continue to provide as much assistance as we can for the LC Help for RDA account. So that email address is still good.
So we're ready for questions.
Okay, so if you would like to ask us something, go ahead.
I'll admit I'm being somewhat of an ostrich. But I have my question or concern is the having both the AACR2 and the RDAs in the catalog, and if you're going to actually use some of these things like the 3x-axis, 6x-axis, 3x, how that's going to, are you going to want to go back and kind of make this hybrid of a combination of, I mean, that's kind of, I kind of see in my head is that, you know, you have some here that have no GMD, some that have GMD, and you're going to want to go back and just like rid the GMDs from your AACR2s and create 3-3s.
Specifically that issue, I think Pat said at Chicago, they're trying to think of a way to take the information and do something with it.
One thing that's different with RDA is it is much more granular than AACR2 in MARC, and it is aiming towards much more machine manipulation of data rather than human intervention. And that is what these 3-3x fields actually are aiming for, is that they will not display to people. They're not meant to be read by humans. They're meant to be used in the back room of your computer to generate displays. RDA specifically says they will not address display issues because that's dependent on your local catalog, but that when the ILS developers truly begin to use this, that's all going to go away, and you will be able to have your AACR2 and RDA records look much more alike.
The mic is on, right?
Yes.
Okay. One thing people have to be reminded about as far as how RDA is going to affect you is you have to also look into your cataloging record vendors to see how they will handle RDA. Are they flexible enough to work with RDA and your ILS and your local decisions, whether it's authority control or whether it's the bibliographic records themselves. So that's one of the key questions you will have when you are purchasing, I think, bibliographic records.
Were there any vendors of bibliographic records in the test?
There were vendors involved in the test records, and so OCLC was involved. There were some other vendors, so they did participate. They have seen what these records are like and what they're going to have to adjust to. And right now at this time, I think since these vendors are commercial operations, they are looking for how many people are going to want RDA records and what they're going to want to have done with either AACR2 records or RDA records, but they are thinking about it. And you should feel free to contact the vendors and say, we want this, or we want to be able to change it to one or the other.
For those of us who started out with AACR cataloging, it seems to me we've come full circle, because we used to add relationships, relator, joint author, editor. So my question is, with the machine manipulation, how will that display when you have an author, a name as an author, and then you have it as an editor or a compiler?
I think the answer is that depends on how you configure your ILS, and that will be different between libraries. I don't think there is a standard display, and this is only going to make it more obvious.
I guess what I mean is the order, because I remember when we used to file card catalogs way in prehistoric times, the author records were first, the cards, and then all the joint authors were next. So I'm wondering, with the machine display, are they going to file everything in the list, or is it going to go alphabetical?
Yeah, as I said, that's up to you and your local ILS, how you want to use this information, what you want to display, what you want to suppress, how you want to index it. If you only want to index the subfield A, you can have them all interfiled together.
Because that's one thing AACR just did, and did away with that.
Right.
Yeah.
I understand that PCC has stopped signing up new people for NAGO training temporarily while they grapple with the training issue for RDA. And at home I have a little stash of headings, name and series headings I need to create. Do I just soldier on with AACR2 until retraining is available?
That's what we're doing at Cornell. We're just soldiering on, as you say.
That works for me, thanks.
At the University of Chicago, we're creating original authority records in RDA if we have an RDA record that we're doing original cataloging on. We have an authorities vendor, we use Backstage, that we send all of our headings to periodically. I don't know what the period is anymore. And we're working with them to figure that sort of thing out, what we do with the headings, how we manage them. And so that's something that's, I think, going to be further developed as RDA implementation officially for everyone comes closer. There's also going to be many more developments with BibCo standard records, and especially Concert standard records, because I'll tell you right now, you cannot do Concert cataloging of online serials with RDA because it's not provider neutral. So there are going to be a lot of discussions over the next year and a half about what to do about that, and that may affect RDA rules as well.
Hi. I would be really curious to know what your thoughts are. Is the MARC record format itself going to change way down in the future? I've heard a lot of talk that the MARC record doesn't capture what RDA can do, but we haven't gotten there because we're still working on RDA. But it's exciting, and I'm just wondering what you guys think and what we could expect.
That's an excellent question, and it's almost like I planted you there to ask that question. Yes, people have said that the MARC format does not sufficiently exploit the capabilities of RDA, and I think that's true. And so does LC, because they have begun a transition of the bibliographic framework where they're going to be exploring alternatives to MARC, so that we will be migrating away from MARC. And I think they're supposed to submit a report in 18 months. Is that right? We think they're supposed to submit a preliminary report about this transition away from MARC in 18 months, and we'll see how that goes. Carol?
I have two questions. One I think is probably kind of big picture, and one is very small picture. Going back to Phoebe's question about the order of things and the response that, that's going to be up to your local system, and I understand the response, but I'm concerned that now what we're going to be moving toward is when each library decides the order of their materials, what's that going to do for our patrons as they go from one school, one library to another? I think that there's going to be a future opportunity for catalogers and others to start putting some standards, some framework around this whole notion, so that you don't have this sort of, you know, itty-bitty worlds where everybody just kind of does whatever they want to do, and you're an undergrad, your things are arranged this way, and then you go to grad school somewhere else and it's arranged completely differently, and then you go to some other school, you know, you go to your public library, it's just going to be kind of bad.
It does have a sort of a free-for-all feeling to it. There's so much cataloger's judgment involved in the completeness of RDA records. I think that you're right, and it definitely introduces a large element of unpredictability in bibliographic records. I mean, right now, bibliographic records are pretty consistent with each other, pretty predictable. I mean, there is some variation, of course, but there's so much latitude in RDA, and it's not that the records are wrong just because they're different. Some are more complete than others. You can put lots and lots and lots of optional information.
I'm suggesting that this is an opportunity for future leadership. That's really what I'm getting at.
Easy for you to say you're retiring.
But my other question really is kind of, you know, small. The elimination of abbreviations kind of concerns me, because the more you have to type out, the more chances there are for errors, for one thing. And when I first heard that, the first thought that came to my mind was carpal tunnel. So are there going to be macros or anything to make it easier to type, you know, these words out fully rather than using abbreviations?
I started making macros in my own system for that reason. I mean, we talked about the same thing. The more you type, the more opportunity there is to make typos. And it seems to me that system vendors are going to have to design systems with more pull-down menus or checkboxes or something like that, because there is a lot more typing. I mean, just the word illustrations a million times a day, you can mess it up easily. Anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just second the idea that you can already create macros on like OCLC and in your local systems as well, and that's going to have to be developed much more. Because RDA does have a lot more lengthy things. But just to clear up the abbreviations issue, if an abbreviation appears on your, what we used to call chief source of information, in an abbreviated form, those fields are transcribed. So if it says 2ED period on your title page or on your source of information, you will include that as the abbreviated form in your edition statement. It's only if it says second edition and it writes out both words that you will transcribe both words, and not, as in AACR2, change that into 2ED period or something else. So
ED period.
Yeah, period. Ignore that one. That's such a stupid rule.
That one's really stupid.
So they're not going away. It's just RDA is much more focused on transcribing based on what you actually have.
I had something else to add. Hold on, Angela. I just want to add one more thing about Carol's question, and that is that in our system, Ex Libris Voyager, you can also create not only macros but templates. So you can have a template for a printed single volume monograph and put all those things in there, the content, media, character, and carrier, that kind of thing. Okay, thank you.
I was not planning on asking this question, but along the lines of these non-abbreviations, why don't we spell out centimeters instead of cm? Period and IN period. Why don't we?
Oh, I know the answer to that one. It's because the JSC does not consider CM to be an abbreviation, but a symbol, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Centimeters?
Yes. But there are cases where you would put a period after centimeters, and that's when it's followed by a 4XX field, right?
Except, of course, it's not followed by a 4XX field because you have the 3x fields in between.
Eventually followed by. Yeah.
I have two more questions. Non-test site members, can we start inputting RDA records in OCLC?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. We can, because right now I see only DLC and wikis, we don't see any small libraries, non-site members, RDA records.
They can if they want to.
We can, okay.
Yeah.
My next question is about, as you said that 336 is not a core element, so we can ignore that, or we have to put that there.
337 is not a core element. 336 is.
Yeah.
336 is the RDA content, which is, you know, what is this? It's a text or it's a sound recording. And the 337, it's the RDA media field, which media is a bad term. It actually indicates what kind of equipment you need to access this resource. So unmediated means you don't need anything. You read it visually, you have a printed thing. If it were an electronic resource, it would say something like online. So you would have some idea of what you needed to use this. That's the one that's optional.
And I'm just going to add something to that. So my understanding, Pat, is that the reason the media is optional is because the carrier, it's sort of implicit in the carrier. So for a print volume, it would be unmediated volume, and because you have volume in the 338, right? 338, it's kind of implicit that that is unmediated. A volume we know is unmediated, so that's why the unmediated part is not core, but the thing that says volume, the carrier, is core.
And all information requirements is mediated and unmediated, that's because of mediated.
They won't see mediated, they'll see the form of mediation that is required, such as online.
I have a question about the authority records. So, I think it's just that I don't understand. So, if you're cataloging an RDA record, and there is an LC authority for a person, you have to use the LC authority.
Yes.
If you're cataloging an RDA record and there isn't, then you create an RDA authority record.
If you're cataloging an RDA, yeah.
And if you create the RDA authority record, do we need to use that RDA authority record then if we're cataloging an AACR2 somewhere else? Or would we create, would people create cataloging an AACR2, another book by the same person, would they then create an AACR2 record? And are these two authority files going to be merged at some point?
Well, I'm going to let Pat follow up on this, but the one thing that I do know is that you see these AACR2 authority records nowadays with the 7XX field at the bottom that has the RDA version of the heading in it. But in answer to your question, where you're cataloging an RDA and you create an RDA authority record, should you be doing that? Because, NACO might tell you not to, right? Just Joe Library down the street, who's a NACO member? Do you want to say anything?
I'm afraid the answer to your very good question about what does an AACR2 record do with an RDA authorized choice of whatever authority record is, I don't know. We were very focused on going forward. We didn't think about what if an AACR2 record comes along behind the RDA record we just cataloged. So I think that's something that we're going to have to ask about and find out. NACO will be working with this issue as well, and they will probably have some guidelines.
So it's just not resolved yet?
I think it's not been asked yet. There was a lot of talk about being able to link the headings during the test, because part of the test was to create authority records for every heading that, except not subjects, but every main preferred authorized access point and the other access points. And of course, people like Mark Twain already exist, but it was to practice the RDA authority structure and rules.
And the alternate identity thing.
Yeah, so
and do you have,
they were set up to be able to be suppressed and not show up as genuine.
in the future, will they be merged? Will that?
We don't know.
I think OCLC set things up with
Come up to the microphone.
The sort of, you have an AACR2 heading with 700 RDA, and they also to reverse, you have an RDA heading, there's a 700 for the AACR2. So
they're reciprocal links, but that was for the test only. Christina's asking about the future, and the answer is we don't know yet.
There was something I would like to add, though. There's a lot of new fields for authority records now. They're not, I mean, they came out in October of 2010, most of them. So they've been around for a while. Lots and lots and lots of new fields for authority records, because we now have the capability of practically cataloging a person, specifying their profession and their gender, where they lived, all kinds of amazing details about people. These are not core elements, so don't be afraid. But these MARC fields have existed for almost a year now, but NACO doesn't want us using them yet. That's my understanding.
Not my understanding.
Really?
Yeah. That's not my understanding. We've been including them.
I mean, even for AACR2?
Oh, not for, no, not for AACR2.
That's what I mean.
The new fields are valid for any authority record, AACR2 or RDA.
Right, they are.
They're used with RDA, rarely in AACR2 because of the restrictions on what you can put in an AACR2 authority record. RDA is much freer about how much information you can include.
But from a technological standpoint, one could, if you're an NACO library, you can put those new MARC fields into an AACR2 authority record if you're a NACO library, but my understanding is that NACO does not want you to do that in an AACR2 record.
That's correct.
Okay.
I have a comment about the RDA. I found out, I studied a little bit about that. I found out RDA really is a good system for not only America, but all over the world. Because when the OCSC and also Library of Congress, they are doing that, they are not doing for America. Because all over the world, all over the Middle East, Africa, everywhere, they use this system. They have to make it a little bit understanding easier for all over the world. They can use it. If we don't like really to type a little bit more, and that's different, you can just go to Google the correct spelling. And when they do something, maybe some kind of weird for us in here, but all over the world they like that, and it has to be so simple, so easy, they understand it. And that.
Yes, two comments. First of all, the reason that it's RDA and not AACR3 was because JSC recognized quite early on that this was not just for the Anglo-American community, but that it was truly going to be available worldwide, and so it was redirected to be much more global. I forgot my other point.
There are other countries
yes,
using it.
Yes.
Their national libraries are starting to use it already.
Yes, the United States was the only country that did this test. Everyone else who switched to RDA simply said,
we're doing it.
Pick a date, and that's when we start. So it is international.
I have a postscript to the carpal tunnel problem. I wonder if many of us have autofill as an option. When I'm typing on my iPhone, do you want to type this? If I hit space bar, it goes right in. I think it may be available on Windows. I don't know. I haven't investigated.
Certainly something to talk to ILS vendors about.
Yeah, because right now my vendor doesn't have that.
Yeah.
Can I just answer the whole issue of carpal tunnel?
We spend hours a day typing on Facebook and emails, and to be geographic persons, are not the only thing that we type. So, those abbreviations, I think they're making a little too much fuss over that. We are typing all day long.
So stop whining.
To go back to the question about the relationship indicators like joint author, editor, and as I call there are relationship indicators and failure designators, and it's an example of why the MARC format is not really adequate for the tasks of future catalogs. I think most catalog designers and thinkers about cataloging do not expect people to be doing browse searches, looking alphabetically through lists of names and titles and so on. We catalogers, we probably still love that. I still do it, but the average person using the catalog does not search that way, I think. So these kinds of designators, I don't know exactly how they'll be used, but they can be used in faceted displays or other kinds of things when you look up an identity record or something about an author and find the different types of things they've done.
Right, so they authored these things and they edited these things and they compiled those things. This is a way of sorting those things out.
Right, and it's not very easy to do with marked records, but in some future world it might be possible. And to address the question of double punctuation, which is something that came from the ISPD and was brought into the ISPD.
Right, not an RDA thing. Right.
It was brought into the ISPD to enable, because in some countries the ending punctuation and punctuation between areas is done automatically, not being input by catalogers as we usually do, and not that we even usually provide an ISPD display in our catalogs for the most part. So it's, in any case, there's no reason for a cataloger to type double punctuation. It's supposed to be, it was kind of a cart before the horse approach, to allow for the fact that a machine couldn't tell if the period that was there was part of an abbreviation or not.
Right.
So I don't see any reason why catalogers should go around inputting double punctuation when it's supposed to be something that's just a machine artifact.
Thank you.
Jean and I are both up here nodding our heads with everything that John just said.
And I do want to say about the carpal tunnel and the errors, more importantly, it wasn't to complain about it, it was just to suggest that we need macros, we need something to make it easier. Not that I'm saying that we should not do anything about it. But I'm curious about Chris's question earlier about cataloging in RDA and then going back and cataloging in AACR2, and I'm just curious because to me, once you start using RDA, wouldn't you continue to use it?
Suppose someone makes an RDA record and they create an authority record, and then in my library I'm not using RDA yet, but there's an RDA authority record, there's no case. I'm not talking about the same person.
Okay.
Let me just repeat what Chris said because I don't know if the microphones picked it up. Chris was asking about what happens if an RDA authority record is the first authority record for a particular heading that's entered into the online authority file in RDA form, which sometimes the form will be different, and then a library that is not using RDA therefore has a problem with an RDA heading on an AACR2 record, and Chris was asking, what do we do? Will there be parallel authority structures for RDA and AACR2? Or do they just use it? And as we said before, that's up in the air.
Getting back to format, Emory was also one of the testing universities, and one of our testers did put some records in MOZ format. So that has been experimented at least with MOZ. And as far as the order of, say, fields, etc., that is really up to your systems and ILS people, because you can adjust your ILS. RDA is not for human consumption display. It's to manipulate the information by machine.
And to show relationships.
To show relationships. But basically, once you have the RDA record, it's going to be up to your ILS, whatever format you have, how those records are going to display. And if your libraries have done surveys of your patrons, you'll find out what they want to see first. And this is what we have done at Emory.
Could you tell us, you surveyed your patrons, and what did you find?
They liked having title first, and they liked having the URL at the top.
Did you address any questions to them about the transcription of the statement of responsibility, all the people, or just the first one?
I don't know about that. I was not the one doing the survey.
I'd be interested to know what people think about. I mean, I get the point about keyword searching, how useful it would be to have all the names transcribed for that purpose. And you don't have to make authorized access points for all those people. You don't have to make authority records for all those people. But it's just something that I wondered about.
But it is something that when you come down to your OPACs, you should go to your patrons. This is way out in the future, I'm sure. We can't decide how we want the bibliographic data to display. Is anybody talking about making all that interesting information in the authority records available to the patron?
Sort of, I think.
Going way out into the future and going up into the cloud and the linked data concept, this is what RDA is aiming for, that our authority records will no longer be locked up in an authority file that librarians access, but it will be linked, and this is where the magic comes in, because I don't know how or who is going to do this linking, but in theory it's going to be linked. And so whether you approach something from Google or Yahoo or a library catalog or some other kind of search engine, you will have an answer to your search query that displays this information
or makes
use of the information to help you disambiguate headings. So you may be able to say, I want the Ava Schmidt who teaches at Tübingen University. I don't care about the one who likes naked pictures all over the internet. And that was my shock when I started doing authority research for Ava Schmidt. It's like, So this will be available to more people, and it will make use of more information in different ways. I'd like to point out that there was a heated discussion on AutoCAD about invading people's privacy, and I never included any information that was not publicly available on their own webpage. And I figure if they're going to put up their, I never gave like addresses, I just, institution. But if they were going to put their institution email on their institution homepage, I was fully justified in including it in my authority record. We don't, track people down to their homes and list the names of their children and how many times they've been divorced and that sort of thing.
If you've ever looked at WorldCat identities, that's a project of OCLC that merges information from authority records and bibliographic records to create this very, very interesting display if you've ever seen it. It has like little graphs of when they were publishing their stuff and tag clouds produced from subject headings. It's a very, very interesting thing, and I'm thinking when authority records become a much richer source of information, they'll be able to build something even better. But even right now, it's really interesting. At our law library, on our webpage, we have a faculty publications page, and when people click on the name of the faculty member, there's a link there that takes them to their WorldCat identities page. That's very cool. So I'm thinking along those lines that one thing that we talk about at Cornell is the ability, if we have these really rich authority records, the ability to do something like, I want to see all the French female 17th century concerto composers, that kind of thing. I'm thinking this could enable that, but that would assume that you've gone back and added all that information to the already existing authority records. Who's going to do that?
We already have it on Wikipedia, because Wikipedia categorizes
that's right.
lots of things. And I was actually looking for female Iranian musicians a while back, and Wikipedia enabled me to do that. I'd love to be able to do that.
Right, so we're playing catch up to Wikipedia.
Wikipedia is one resource that we can use.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, a lot of the RDA authority record examples that I've seen cite to Wikipedia. as a matter of fact.
I'd also like to mention VIAF, the Virtual International Authority File,
Right.
which if you look up a name, you can see the same link will take you to, you can see the German form and the French national form and the American form, and you know, it's not, they're not merged records, they're still separate records, but it does put them all together so that you can say, yes, the author that was born in 1957 is the same author who works at Tübingen University or things like that. So that's another example of where all this information can be put together in different new ways.
I'm seeking some advice now. My library is very small with an increasing, well, shrinking acquisitions budget. And so right now we're just accepting RDA records and loading them. I mean, I take them as is if I see them. I do very little original cataloging, but I see the next 18 months as an opportunity to learn a little. And so should libraries like mine even bother putting in RDA records if I have to do original? Should I do it in AACR2, or should I just wait for someone else to catalog it first? I mean, I really don't know what to do. I probably only do about a dozen original records anymore.
I thought I saw a statement from OCLC saying now that this test is over, they don't want people adding RDA records. I thought I saw that. Am I making this up? I mean, the official, I mean, people are, but I thought, you know, one day I logged on to OCLC and then the news of the day pops up. I thought for sure I saw one recently that said, now the test is over, we're not exactly thrilled with people adding new RDA records, so I can't really recommend that. But
well, I mean, it's interesting to me sitting here, the tone of the meeting is RDA is coming. There's an attitude of acceptance about it. I mean, it's not this fighting that I sensed at the last couple of annual meetings.
You'll be assimilated.
Yeah, being assimilated.
Resistance is futile.
And so that's fine. I can move forward with my life now. So, but apparently I cannot. And it just seems very weird to me that I have all these links now so I can educate myself. It's time to sign up for training opportunities that OhioNet offers and things like that. But I can't do anything with all this because,
you know what's helped me a lot is to examine the test records. The test records are in OCLC. You can look at them. You can see all the testers' different versions. You can see the differences between them. And that's really how I learned a lot about RDAs, just closely examining the records, thinking about, would I do it that way, would I do it a different way? And as I said, I wrote to that LC list, RDA help, and I got answers directly from Judy Kuhagan, and, you know, very authoritative answers. So,
I mean, I understand all that, but it just seems that futile to continue to catalog, if I have to do original, to do it in ACR2. So, but I guess the answer to my question is...
I'm doing Joe Kelly in ACR2.
Okay, so I need to know. You're using RDA now.
That's correct. I'm doing original cataloging in RDA, but we're a big library. We're a huge contributor to NACO and BIBCO, and we were official testers, so I'm speaking from a very different perspective than most people.
I think this is a very jittery time for all of us, especially because as catalogers, we have a very low tolerance for ambiguity. And I think we spend a lot of time worrying about things that, you know, the rest of the world doesn't worry about. I think when Carol, please don't take it personally. It's not. I've heard about, you know, these issues for many years. It's really not criticizing you personally or criticizing anyone. I think we need to get into a different state of mind. You know, we are living in a world that is full of ambiguity. The young people, the undergraduates, they are used to have data all over the place, displayed in different ways. I wouldn't worry about them. You know, it's our own anxieties, I think, that, you know, we are not doing things, you know, in a totally standardized display. They're used to it. They deal very well. They deal wonderfully with ambiguity. What?
That's one time.
So I think it's us that we need to worry about. I want to say also a word about local decisions. I think it's going to be a big mistake if people start deleting data that is already there. I've done some of it in the past, and I begin to regret it, and I actually figured out ways. For example, call numbers. I actually put the call numbers back into electronic resources and suppress that field. You know, we can do a lot of manipulation and local decisions on how to display, but don't delete data. You know, you may need it in the future. One word about the 33X field. I know that right now we feel very strongly, oh, this is an ACR2 record and this is an RDA record, and never the twain shall meet. But I think that in the future we may decide that those 33X fields are really useful for machine manipulations, for indexing them so they will be searchable, for displaying them in a faceted display, and we may decide that we want to globally go back using that
retrospectively change
retrospectively adding those 33X fields to our entire database, so we'll have more a continuity, and we'll have more data. And right now it may seem like sacrilege. Oh no, you know, we have to know what's an ACR2 record, we have to know what, but you know, it may not be necessary. You know, let's put the data there in our records and let our machine manipulate it in a way that would, you know, map it, facet it, index it in any way we want.
So you want us to just chill?
Yeah, and more data, the better. You know, I love the new authority. We don't do RDA yet, but I love the idea of enriching the authority.
I love that idea too.
You know,
I love that.
There's so many things that we can do with them. You know, and people who don't want to use the data don't. But if we do want to use the data and share it, and once we get it out of the mark, you know, we will be able. I imagine in 10 years that our bibliographic records will just be full of URIs. You know, instead of a name, we'll have URI linking to that authority record.
That's the idea behind the semantic web.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's just state of mind. That's what I wanted to say.
Richard.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the concept of typing more, and
somebody answer the phone and ask whose it is.
It's probably someone along the left.
They're trying to find it.
Oh, yeah.
Anyhow, getting back to typing more, and I'm very interested in the fact that you put up gave the reference for the RDA for the administrators, because being a full PCC member and BibCo Concern ACO, we're going to be creating those longer records, and we're not, just in addition to the carpal tunnel syndrome and the whole thing, we're going to have to explain why now, before when we did an authority record, and you could end up with a macro that would blast that sucker in you know 2 minutes, you could get an AACR2 authority record that had 2 fields on it, and now we have the possibility, and of course I'm with Yael, I like to see those fuller records, but that 2-minute record
just became a monster, right?
Just became a monster in front of your eyes.
It takes a village to build an authority record.
Exactly.
But we have a village. The good news is we have a village.
It's just going to take a village with a couple of suburbs. So,
a megalopolis.
Yeah. And additionally, something we haven't talked about is the implementation learning curve that those who are heads of technical services or associate directors are going to have to explain why you used to be able to chunk out, you know, 10 originals in 10 minutes, and now it's going to take 15 minutes, you know, because of the learning curve, all these extra fields, and try to explain how much better the user experience is going to be the retrievability, the ability to manipulate the data, and I think we have to put an enormous emphasis on that side, which will compensate for the fact that, yes, it might take a little longer, and we may need people trained at a higher level than what they currently are.
Yes. That priority.
Yes. I just want to point out that I don't think any of our directors would ever go to a public services librarian and say, you've been mucking around with that brand new electronic resource for 2 hours. What did you get for that? And, you know, we have to stand up and stamp our feet that we are providing a service. All of those extra fields are not necessary. They are, if you have it on the piece in hand, you can include it and prevent future conflicts. You're providing information for your future self or other colleagues to know, I don't have to create an authority record for that. This is the same person. The administrative law judge who also translates Icelandic mystery novels, who does exist, he's one of our alumni, is the same person. If we didn't have that information, maybe we wouldn't think that. So that's the kind of thing that, you know, we have to tell our administrators, that we're providing as good a service and in very many ways a similar service to the public information librarians.
I just want to say very quickly, in addition to what Richard said, again, what I'm saying is we need leadership opportunities. It's not just the administrators, it's the reference librarians, it's, you know, you were talking, I think Pam was talking about a survey. We're going to need lots of people to be involved in taking advantage of whatever it is that this is bringing. And this is giving our catalogers new life, new something to do in the future, and take more leadership to make it good.
Carol, we will retain you as our consultant. One more question, and then we have to go.
Also following on what Richard said, it occurs to me that the learning curve and the ambiguity, which are just a necessary process, but are putting in danger OCLC expert community. We're finally starting to make inroads on having the infrastructure where we can update each other's records, modify each other's records, and get back to true cooperative cataloging rather than doing everything locally. And I guess my fear is that unless we really push for it, that's going to take a back step in this process of implementing RDA.
As Carol said, leadership opportunities. Okay, I'd like to thank everyone. This was a really stimulating discussion, and we hope you got a lot out of it.
And that you'll join us at...
Yes, the next program is in room 204B in 15 minutes.